Hello everyone and welcome to the National Army Museum for this week's Friday Insight. The museum is the national home of the history and heritage of the Army, a place where you can experience the story of the Army from the perspective of those who have served in it. There are many ways you can support our museum. You can buy a book in our shop, visit the cafe, donate or become a member where you can get exclusive discounts and your very own events programme. So today I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Matthew Spring. Matt is Head of History at Truro School in Cornwall. He's the author of With Zeal and With Bayonets Only, the British Army on Campaign in North America, 1775 to 1783. Today he will examine how the British Army approached the American War of Independence. This talk is part of the National Army Museum's American Revolution series, marking the 250th anniversary of the start of the American War of Independence. There will be time for questions at the end of the discussion for both our online and in-person audience. For our online audience, you can post the questions in the Q&A chat bar, and we will put these to the speaker at the end. In person, I'll be passing around the mic. Moving on with some technical points. Should we encounter any technical issues, please bear with us while we work to rectify them. If your stream freezes, we suggest that you click the refresh button at the top of your browser. That usually cures all ills. And a member of our team will be active in the chat bar to help you if you have any questions. With that all being said, I'm now going to hand over to Matt.
Thank you very much, Amy. Well, gosh, thanks all for coming. Amy told me there'd probably be 2 or 3 Chelsea pensioners here and that'd be it. So I'm much impressed. Thank you. Thank you for investing the next hour with me. My name is Matthew Spring. As Amy said, I was extremely lucky in the late 90s to be given the chance by Leeds University to do doctoral research on the topic of the British Army in the American War of Independence. I had the fantastic Professor John Charles as my supervisor. There was a stable of wonderful guys there doing similar sorts of research. Kevin Lynch, for example, and Stephen Brumwell, whose book I put up on the screen. If you're interested in the French and Indian War and you want to buy one book on that topic, I would recommend Stephen's book. I mentioned Stephen in particular because many of the adaptations that the British Army made to its methods in fighting the American War of Independence were prefigured by things that they were doing in the earlier conflict in the 1750s and early 1760s. And Steve would take you through those if you're interested. So that should be in the library, in the museum bookshop here. And if it isn't, well, there we are. So, okay, since 2002, I've taught at Truro School. As Amy said, thanks very much to that institution for allowing me to come down here today. I can't talk about the entirety of the American War of Independence. Obviously, it's a long conflict, many theatres within North America and indeed outside North America. So I picked a few themes today to talk about, and hopefully that will amuse you. The American War, mission impossible. Was it mission impossible? Could the British Army have won the American War of Independence in any meaningful way? You can make up your own minds about that. There they are. There's the American colonies in 1775, all 13 of them. As we say, 1,000 miles from north to south. So it's a very significant area. Population, 2.5 million. Of whom maybe 500,000 were slaves. There were disagreements about the total population, but those are as good an estimate as you can find. And really the interesting thing is that between March 1776, when the main force in America evacuated Boston and went to Halifax, Nova Scotia, and the arrival of that army back in New York, for Howe's New York campaign in July 1776. There's very few British soldiers anywhere in America. We did have the fiasco of the June-July Southern Expedition, which attempted to take control of Charleston in South Carolina, but that, as we say, that didn't go very well. So, okay, the real effort to try to recover the American colonies begins, as we've said, in the summer of 1776, with Howe's army landing on Staten Island. Something like 50,000 troops, British troops in total, serve in North America during the course of the war. Again, these are only estimates, but they're the best estimates you're likely to find. There were German troops, subsidy troops, hired to augment British forces in North America. There were enormous numbers of loyalists who served in various capacities in militia formations or indeed provincial units that served alongside the British Army. But our focus today will be on those British soldiers. And at the bottom, I've put there, a third of the British forces in North America were withdrawn in 1778. Anyone here tell me why? Limited forces already to deal with this enormous crisis. Why were they withdrawn? The French came in, absolutely. Once the French came in, it changed the conflict completely. The 13 American colonies became a much lesser importance to the government in London, and so forces were needed to rush to the Sugar Islands to defend those against the French. Anyway, there we are. So that's the mission. We've got 2.5 million American colonists and 13 American colonies, 1,000 miles north to south. As you can see at the top there, General Harvey, who was the Adjutant General of the British Army in 1775, his view was this was a no-go. To conquer America internally by our land force, said General Harvey, is as wild an idea as ever controverted common sense. And this is perhaps the main problem that faces the British Army in America in attempting to restore British authority. The Continental Army. You've had a talk about the Continental Army, I believe, recently. Continental Army was established in June 1775 during the Siege of Boston, when the Congress decided to adopt the forces outside the city, blockading, besieging the city. It's organised into 6 departments. There was briefly a 7th Canadian department, but the 6 departments, North, East, Middle, Hudson, South, West, most significant of which for most of the war is the Middle Department, of which General Washington was the commander. You see Washington on the left there conferring with some of his officers. Everywhere in the American colonies, the army, the Continental Army, was supported by militia. Thousands and thousands and thousands of militia organised in relays, so that any particular force that you might look at in the course of the war, any battle, you might expect half the American forces, let's say, to be Continental Army, and the rest maybe to be militia, part-time soldiers. Many of the commanders of the Continental Army, Washington included, are by nature aggressive. They have aggressive temperaments. They wanted to use the Continental Army to finish the war as quickly as possible. They wanted to drive the British out of North America. And they do when they have the opportunity. You know, there are various incidents during the war where Continental Army forces catch the British and inflict very nasty reverses. Trenton, 1776, the German subsidy troops caught sleeping there. Stony Point, 1779, British post up on the Hudson River, captured by an aggressive attack, bayonet attack by the Continental Army. Yorktown, 1781, when Cornwallis's entire force is snapped up by Washington himself with the assistance of the French. So they are aggressive. Their prime objective, as we've said, is to drive out the British if they can. But for most of the war, they understand that they're limited to a strategy of forward defence. They realise that if they take too great a risk, that they'll suffer serious reverses that would damage the Continental Army, possibly destroy it, and cause all sorts of political problems. So for most of the war, they are effectively trying to limit British efforts to restore British control over the colonies. They're particularly keen on inviting bloody frontal attacks by British forces that would end the conflict quickly by sapping the limited strength that is available to British commanders. Why did British commanders seek throughout the war to fight battles against the Continental Army. On the right-hand side, we've got two images there. Top image, Sir Henry Clinton. He serves as a subordinate commander to Sir William Howe, the overall British commander in the first half of the war. From 1778, he takes over the command. At the bottom, we've got Nathaniel Greene, one of Washington's most able American subordinates. He himself commands in the Southern Department in the crucial last phase of the war. These guys are probably the most interesting strategists that the war produces on either side, I would say. And you can see at the top, Sir Henry Clinton, to force Washington to an action upon terms tolerably equal has been the object of every campaign during this war. And it would be the same for the rest of the war. And again, not just in the main theatre in the north, but also in the southern theatre as well, where again British commanders there, like Cornwallis, would again seek to fight decisive battles, engagements against the continental forces in an attempt to restore British authority. Why? Why do they identify battle as the main route to victory? Well, we have Nathaniel Greene there saying the limits of the British government in America are their out-sentinels. So they were aware that the limited forces, British forces in America, could control only the limited amounts of territory that they could immediately occupy. Anything outside of that, by default, was controlled by the American rebel authorities via their control of the rebel militia that we've mentioned already. And again, Nathaniel Greene at the bottom, May 1781, if the British divide their forces, they will fall by detachments. If they operate collectively, they cannot command the country. So, same sort of dilemma that maybe the French found themselves in the Peninsular War later. If the French forces decided to concentrate to try and deal with, let's say, Wellington and his army, then they could not control the countryside and its resources, and the guerrillas would prosper. And if they dispersed to try to deal with the guerrillas, then Wellington would be able to come in and take advantage and defeat French forces in detail. So similar sorts of situation in the south in the last phase of the war. So battle is the main way that British commanders identify that they will be able to win the war by, number one, dispersing the Continental Army. Here we see another reason that starts to clarify in the minds of British commanders, British leaders in the early year or so, first year or so of the war. This is Sir William Howe. So Sir William Howe says at the top, "From what I can learn of the designs of the leaders of the rebels, it is my firm opinion they will not retract until they have tried their fortune in a battle and are defeated." So this is Howe talking about his plans for what would become the New York campaign. If we don't defeat the Continental Army, the leaders of the rebel movement will continue to prosecute the war. Only by defeating the Continental Army can we get those leaders perhaps to change their mind, come forward and deal with a negotiated settlement of some sort. Second quote there by Sir William Howe. We've moved on a little bit. "There is not the least prospect of conciliating this continent," he tells the government, "until its armies have been roughly dealt with. There are many inhabitants in every province well affected to the British government, from which, no doubt, we will receive assistance, but not until His Majesty's arms have a clear superiority by a decisive victory." So there he's pointing to the existence of loyal Americans, loyalist Americans, who will not be encouraged to come forward and lend their assistance to British efforts, put their shoulders to the wheel in various ways until the British Army has shown that it's superior. And the last one down the bottom, by June, his thinking again has moved on slightly. "Should the enemy offer battle in the open field, we must not decline it. Success would not fail to have the most intimidating effects upon the minds of those deluded people." So now he's talking about the general population at large. So battle would achieve, victories in battle would achieve various goals. It would encourage the leadership of the rebel movement. to come forward and negotiate a deal. It would encourage loyalists to come forward, and it would encourage ordinary Americans to abandon their support for the revolution. And here we have the reason why the third reason becomes so significant in British thinking, because the American population of 2.5 million that we've mentioned now several times are armed. They're not always necessarily particularly well armed, and they're not necessarily the expert crack shots, frontiersmen of the American mythology of the American War of Independence. But a very significant proportion of them do have weapons and are prepared to use them. Here we have Sir Henry Clinton again, top left-hand side. To gain the hearts and subdue the minds of America in 1777 is the British objective. You cannot conquer these people. You cannot force them to accept British control. You must encourage them to do so, because again, the whole population is liable to resist you otherwise. Nathaniel Green, down the bottom, says the same thing. Probably the clearest way that this was expressed by anyone on either side in the whole of the war. This is not a war of posts, meaning this is not a war that will be won by simply capturing individual points, cities, fortresses, river crossings, whatever. This is not a war of posts. This is a contest for states, his word for the colonies, dependent on opinion. So both sides, you see, both sides, commanders on both sides, talk in this way, that the ultimate objective must be to convince the American people to continue to support one side or to throw their support over onto the other side. Some more quotes. Sir Henry Clinton, September 1776, "My advice has ever been to avoid even the possibility of a check. We live by victory." And this is the other side of the coin. This is the problem that this causes for British commanders in America, because if you take big risks, if you enable the Americans to score successes against British forces, then your operations become very counterproductive, because you drive lots of Americans back onto the side of the American rebels. So this is the caution that often is queried by historians when they study the war, when they look at the conduct of British commanders, and go so far sometimes as to suggest that British commanders are effectively acting in a treasonable way by behaving so cautiously, by allowing American forces opportunities to slip away sometimes. It's very simple. They understood if they took big risks and the risks didn't pay off and the Americans inflicted reverses on British forces, then this was very counterproductive in the overall hearts and minds battle. So it's quite modern. This is the sort of way that we've come to expect wars of decolonialization, wars in the modern age where the population support for one side or other becomes a decisive, if not the decisive factor. O'Hara in the middle, Brigadier Giles O'Hara, same thing. "The most trifling check to our arms acts like an electrical fire by rousing at the same moment every man upon this vast continent in pursuit of their favourite independency." Again, this is something that you see in the historiography of the war, certainly in the popular books that most people who study the war are using. There is a sense that the smallest trifling little piddling skirmishes get elevated to enormous significance. And this is why, again, because of the effect that they have on popular opinion in America. Last quote there for the moment. Lord Rawdon on the capture of wounded men from the British rear, Battle of Hobkirk's Hill in April 1781. He reports on his victory, albeit very costly victory against Green, with the concern that a number of British wounded had been taken away by a sweep into the British rear, probably, he says, with intent to deceive the country people respecting the outcome of the action. So even something as little as the American side may have lost the engagement, but they've been able to take away some British wounded, is going to be dangerous because it could be used to influence the local people to think that the Americans had maybe won the battle. And again, it's not just the British side that you see this type of language being used. Both sides are using this language. There we are. Let's get to some adaptations. So, okay, this is a very unusual conflict. It's one the British Army doesn't tend to face all that often in the 18th century. It fights in a variety of theatres, fights a variety of enemies, but this is quite an unusual conflict. And there's my guilty secret. That probably the thing that drew me to the American War of Independence first as a schoolboy was these gorgeous uniforms as laid down in the 1768 warrant. And I suspect a lot of other people who are interested in the American War of Independence probably followed the same path. These are three lovely images by Don Troiani, an American artist who paints figures from both sides in the war. And on the left-hand side, we've got a grenadier in the warrant uniform with the fur cap, wings on the shoulders. On the right-hand side, we've got a light infantryman recently introduced into the British Army, or reintroduced, I should say, again, in the early 1770s. Again, interesting headgear, variety of caps worn by light infantry, leather caps, felt caps, all sorts. And in the middle, we've got the battalion company man, hat man, whatever we want to call him. So again, these are the warrant uniforms. These are the uniforms, again, that I imagine if people are painting toy soldiers, that they'd be used to these uniforms. Ironically, those uniforms probably don't represent what the average British soldier looked like for most of the American War of Independence. On the right-hand side, there you go, Don Troiani's book. Troiani is one of the leading artists who's illustrated this theme. What I'm telling you is nothing new. We've known this for a long time now. On the left-hand side, we've got an image of a battalion company man from the 24th Regiment. 24th Regiment was part of Burgoyne's expedition, which went down from Canada in an attempt to end the rebellion in 1777, supposedly in concert with Sir William Howe, whom Burgoyne expected to march up the Hudson. He didn't do that. Anyone know where Howe went in 1777? Where did Howe go instead? Anyone know? Howe decided he was going to take the British Army to Philadelphia instead. So when Burgoyne marched down from Canada, there was nobody to meet him. Anyway, there we go. So 24th Regiment on the left-hand side. We've got Don Troiani's interpretation of that in the middle. And we can see, again, the uniform's already been significantly modified there. Simple modifications, again, that hark back to practice in the French and Indian War. Coats cut significantly shorter. Round hats, or cocked hats, rather, cut down into something that much more resembles a cap. In this instance, the adaptations were not optional. Unfortunately, John Paul Jones had captured the uniforms, new uniforms for 1777 en route to Canada at sea, and therefore Burgoyne's army had to adapt their uniforms by cutting off cloth, patching, etc., etc. Anyway, there we are. So, same thing, probably get this book in the museum shop. This is one of Jerry Emberton's wonderful plates in the Osprey series. We can see British soldiers there in a variety of uniforms at the front. The guy at the back is a Hessian Jaeger rifleman, one of the subsidy troops that we brought in. Guy at the front there is the 62nd Foot man, again, part of Burgoyne's army, adaptations to uniforms. Those adaptations, if they had to be made, if the other troops that go to North America, we can see that they choose to make adaptations from the very beginning. Wonderful article, you could go away and look it up on the internet by Linnea Bass, William Burke. That gives us a huge level of detail on the Brigade of Guards that was selected to go out to fight in America in 1776, stayed in America for most of the war. On the left-hand side is a portrait of one of those Guards officers, Captain Dowdeswell. And if you look at the article, you'll see that the changes include officers and sergeants putting aside their pole arms and instead taking up fusées, light muskets. The hats being uncocked, those lovely cocked hats, uncocked and cut round. The coats being, again, significantly shortened. Lace being removed from hats, coats. And overall trousers, or mosquito trousers, or gaiter trousers, being substituted for the regular woolen breeches and long gaiters. So, great article. I strongly recommend that. Gives you a fantastic insight. Right from the beginning, the British Army knew that its troops would be campaigning in unusual circumstances and that their clothing and equipment would need to be changed accordingly. Wherever you look at contemporary illustrations of British troops engaged in North America, we do see traces of similar adaptations having been made. This is a fantastic painting by Robert Cleveley of the landing at Kips Bay in September 1776, part of the New York campaign, Howe's New York campaign. Originally thought to have been British troops taking control of Rhode Island, but an American historian, fantastic historian, Don Hagist, was able to prove that attribution was wrong. And again, there's a little cutout there I put showing British troops in one of the boats being taken ashore by the Navy, wearing uniforms that are significantly at odds with that warrant that we most commonly associate with the war. Another imaginative illustration that shows the defence of the Chew House during the Battle of Germantown, October 1777, by the 17th Foot. Again, probably a book that you could buy, one of the Osprey series. Probably you can buy it at the museum shop here. But again, the same theme. Coats are cut down, hats are uncocked, packs are put aside. You can see the soldier in the foreground here wearing a blanket on a tump line, blanket roll. So again, lots of modifications being made to uniforms equipment for real practical service in America. Some Highlanders, again a mixture of Troyani on the left and the right, and in the middle another Embleton illustration. The Highlanders, what have the Highlanders lost, folks? They've lost their kilts, absolutely. What else have the Highlanders lost apart from the kilts? Their what, sorry? The feather bonnets. Ah, okay, right. What weapon do we associate with the Highlanders of the 18th century? Their beautiful claymores, their broadswords. So the broadswords are put aside. The special pistols, iron pistols, that the Highlanders are issued, they're put aside in North America. Again, we see the overall trousers that are much more convenient for service in a woody country. And here, perhaps, the most interesting of the uniforms that's adopted in North America. This is the uniform that we're fairly certain was worn by light infantry troops in America throughout the war, probably. We can see at the top there, Lieutenant William Robertson of the 55th Light Company on arrival in St. Lucia in 1778. He writes, he arrived having on only a waistcoat with sleeves, such as the light infantry wear, with a pair of trousers. This was my dress, he says. Now I shall set out with a flannel shirt and trousers, with a new coat, sash and gorget, a mark of respect for the French. For with the rebels we always fought dressed, as I have before described. Interesting. Now he's gone to the Caribbean to fight the French. He feels it's appropriate to return to some of the more the items of wear that you'd associate with the army on more officially. Anyway, right, some illustrations there. Bottom left-hand side, we've got a cutaway from a painting of the Battle of Paoli, or the Paoli Massacre, as the Americans call it. Light infantry surprising part of the Continental Army in 1777. In the middle there, we've got another image by the same artist, Xavier de la Gatta, again, showing light infantrymen in this distinctive, very utilitarian costume. And on the right, a mannequin there, which gives us perhaps a better idea of what it would have looked like in more detail. Again, none of this is new. People have known all this stuff for decades. It just doesn't tend to get into the public view of the war, which as we'll see, is dictated largely perhaps by Hollywood. House orders, August 1776. More evidence of adaptations that were made when the troops went into the field. When the troops land, they are to carry nothing with them but their arms, ammunition, blankets, 3 days' provisions. There we've got an image on the right that again gives us the view of what British soldiers almost certainly looked like. The most of the army almost certainly looked like that in 1776, probably 1777 as well, and maybe for the rest of the war. Again, the blanket roll, the knapsacks put aside, essentials being carried only by the soldiers for days at a time. And not just the ordinary enlisted men, but also the officers. Captain the Honourable William Leslie, August 1776. It is now a fortnight we have lain on the ground, wrapped in our blankets. My whole stock, everything that I have with me, consists of 2 shirts, 2 pair of shoes, 2 handkerchiefs, half of which I use, the other half I carry in my blanket, like a peddler's pack. And it's not just Leslie, it's also Lieutenant Loftus-Cliff, 1777. Our field equipage was reduced to 2 shirts and a blanket and a canteen for each officer. So they are effectively roughing it in a way that is not normal for the 18th century British Army. Historian, American historian, John Rees, if you're interested in how British soldiers sheltered from inclement conditions in America throughout the war, then again, go to the internet, look up Rees. He gives an astonishing level of detail on this topic. He says British troops built brush huts more often and relied upon their shelter for longer periods than did soldiers of the Continental Army. And yet we're taught that it's the Continental Army that roughs it and that endures throughout the American War of Independence. Well, you know, the British Army were no slouches when it came to roughing it. To support Rees's view, there we have Captain Lieutenant Graham. Our encampments, he said, were always chosen on the banks of a stream, were extremely picturesque. We had no tents, so you do not get many references to British troops going out into the field and being able to use tents. Occasionally officers might be able to have tents, soldiers' tents, which they shared between them. But the men instead were obliged to construct wigwams of fresh boughs to keep off the rays of the sun during the day. There you've got another illustration, Xavier Delegata, again of the Paoli massacre. So ironically, this is an American wigwam that we can see here. But this is the sort of thing that British troops were doing. You cannot take enormous amounts of baggage into the field, particularly if we're moving fast. If we need to try and catch the Continental Army or destroy portions of it, you're going to have to rough it, folks. And rough it they did. And they roughed it throughout the war in various theatres. Sometimes maybe they roughed it a little bit too much. Because as we can see here, Cornwallis's army in the south, in the Carolinas, lost half of its manpower in his second invasion of North Carolina between January and April 1781. And those losses, folks, that 50% loss rate included, I'm sorry to tell you, significant numbers of deserters. Soldiers who just had enough, they couldn't take it anymore. One of whom was a guy called John Robert Shaw, a guy who enlisted in Bradford and who said in his memoirs, written after the war, I was captured by a party of American dragoons. The guy with me burst into tears. I thought it was very good fortune. He'd had enough. Here's O'Hara, Brigadier General O'Hara's comment on the campaign at the conclusion of the campaign. What remains of the army, Cornwallis's army, are so completely worn out by the excessive fatigues of the campaign, in a march of above 1,000 miles, most of them barefoot, naked, and for days together living upon carrion, which they had not often time to dress, and 3 or 4 ounces of unground Indian corn, sweet corn, Entre nous, between us, the spirit of our little army has evaporated a good deal. No zeal or courage is equal to the constant exertions we're making. So there we go. There was a balance to be met, and sometimes that balance was not met. Let's talk about tactics. Famous painting. Which battle? Anyone know?
Bunker Hill.
Bunker Hill. Well done. Thank you. So this is a painting by Howard Parr, 1897, I think. And it's, again, one of the images that's most often associated with the war. We can see here 3 ranks of British soldiers deployed shoulder to shoulder, making their way up the hill. Unfortunately, it doesn't really give us a very accurate sense, even of how the Battle of Bunker Hill was conducted, notwithstanding what the British were doing in the rest of the war. That image, very influential. If you've watched films set in the American War of Independence, top left-hand side, rather strange film from 1985 called Revolution. Anyone know that film? Strange casting. Al Pacino, Natasha Kinski. Donald Sutherland made a rather astonishing Sergeant Major. But again, you can see how Parr's painting has influenced the filmmaker's decisions about how to depict battle in the war. Shoulder to shoulder, 3 ranks, grim, machine-like. Same thing for the film The Patriot, 2000 film, Mel Gibson, maybe an even stranger film than Revolution in many ways. And there's an image top right, just a little still of one of the British redcoats who's presumably been told, I would like you to channel catatonic for me, please. Walking musket. What we want is emotionless automata, unthinking, machine-like. There we go. Right, well, that's nothing like how the British Army fought its battles in the American War of Independence. Admittedly, at Bunker Hill, the troops made their attacks in more or less what you and I would think of as close order, and the onlookers, including British officers, do make the point that the troops could not get forward with the required celerity because of rail fences. They went forward, for example, at a very slow march. There was swampy ground, brick kilns, several small fields enclosed by strong paling that prevented close order troops from moving forward with the speed that they needed. So, although they'd already gone into 2 ranks before the Battle of Bunker Hill, Howe afterwards puts the whole army into a formation that, again, we might describe as a kind of open order. So, 1st of August 1776, the infantry of the army, without exception, meaning including grenadiers, including light infantry, is ordered upon all occasions to form 2 deep with the files at 18-inch intervals until further orders. Now, if you think that drill manuals at the time allowed 18 inches per man from shoulder to shoulder in the files, sometimes a little more, sometimes 24 inches. If you have 18 inches interval between those files, you've just dramatically opened up the formation. And that's why, again, we talk about the terrain at Bunker Hill. Well, this is the terrain around the North Bridge at Concord on the first day of the war. And this is what officers talk about a great deal when they're discussing the war in America, the terrain, how the terrain limited formations. There's the Battle of Camden in the south, August 1780. You're not going to maneuver troops in close order through terrain that looks like that. So, yeah. Nor do you need to, because there was not all that much of this article in North America. Very little cavalry. The British took 2 cavalry units to America, one of which was withdrawn. Horses, enormous problem. Some provincial cavalry units were raised, but again, there's not the proportion of cavalry in the war in North America that you would expect in, let's say, European campaigns. So you don't need to have very tight formations in North America. Cavalry was the main threat to infantry if they were not in very tight formations. And again, another reason why we want very loose formations. These are all descriptions of British attacks at various battles in the American War of Independence. And you see very quickly that we're not talking about parade ground order. We're not talking about slow advances like at Bunker Hill. The attacks are almost always described in these terms, that the troops briskly marched up to the enemy. They briskly ascended the slope. They advanced fearlessly and very quickly, with as much velocity as the ground would admit. After a very quick march, they moved up briskly. They marched forwards briskly or rushed with great shouts. They advanced rapidly, so on, so on, so on, so on. My favourite, towards the bottom, the British line advanced at a sort of trot with a loud halloo. It was the most beautiful line I ever saw, said one of the Americans who then helped destroy it at the Battle of Cowpens. Whoops, okay. And there are a couple of comments down there from the German subsidy troops who definitely did not favour this style of tactics in North America. Englishmen be the devil for going on, said one German officer. Or another German officer described it as the English gallop. So there we are, okay. Lots of references in America again. A couple of Troiani prints here. Troiani has depicted these guys at the trail. Again, if troops are moving with this level of celerity when they advance forward on the battlefield, when they make their attacks, they're going to have to carry their weapons in a method other than at the shoulder. So the trail, something referenced very frequently. Other references to troops needing to move quickly. Instructions from Howe at the top there. They must discumber themselves of everything except their arms and ammunition. So before action, you dump all of your gear. So all of these films that show troops marching forward with packs or with knapsacks with 60 pounds of gear, it's all nonsense. Description there in the middle of the Battle of Princeton. A party of them, the Redcoats, probably the 17th Regiment, came into our field, laid down their packs there, and formed at the corner of the garden, 60 yards from the door, then marched away immediately to the field of battle. And later on, probably the same troops retreated 8 rods to their packs, laid in a line. So again, everything that we have from contemporaries tells us that the British are fighting in a very aggressive fashion. Tactics, well, okay, grand tactics then. What are they attempting to do, British generals? They're attempting very much not to attack the Americans in the frontal way that the Americans would very much like them to do. Captain James Murray at the top there, August 1776, they, the Americans, had imagined that we should land directly in front of their works on Long Island, march up and attack them without further precaution. Which is precisely what British generals are not going to do. Loftus Cliff down there, again at the bottom. General Howe is determined not to run our heads against their works, which is what they have all along hoped for. So what are they doing instead? For most of the war, British commanders are looking for outflanking opportunities. So here we got Long Island there, the 2 arrows on the left and the centre ground there, 2 red arrows are there to pin the Americans in place, keep their attention, while the main column does a long outflanking march and takes the Americans in the rear. So there we go, Battle of Long Island, first of Howe's major victories against Washington in the 1776 campaign. Got the same thing here a year later at the Battle of Brandywine, Howe's campaign to capture Philadelphia. And we can see, again, towards the bottom of the image, you can just make out British formations there to grab the Americans' attention, while the column, the outflanking column, the main striking force, does an enormously long outflanking march, 17 miles they had to cover before they could deploy for attack. And in order to do these outflanking attacks, the British use some of the best troops in their army. They, a little bit like Wellington, I suppose, creates the Light Division in the Peninsular War. British commanders create a division made up of the choice units of the army, light battalions, grenadier battalions, the guards, various other choice units like the 33rd Regiment of Foot. And these guys must have been super fit because, again, the references to these guys' ability to move quickly over long distances and then fight are really breathtaking. Trotted about 3 miles without a halt to draw breath, Harlem Heights, 1776, or covered most of the 5 miles from Philadelphia to the Battle of Brandywine in a kind of half-running march, or ran for 3 miles without stopping in order to engage the Americans at Monmouth. So these are fit guys. These are some of the toughest guys in the army, and they are rotated in and out of these special elite flank battalions that the army creates. Rather than keep these flank battalions, grenadiers, light infantry with their parent units, they're combined into composite elite units. They become the spear point of the army in America. Until the Americans get wise. So in the later battles of the war, we can see here, for example, the Battle of Camden, and here the Battle of Cowpens, big disaster, and here the Battle of Guilford Courthouse. In the later campaigns of the war, the Americans are learning to avoid this. So they pick battlefields where there is very little opportunity for British commanders to insert forces onto a flank in order to roll them up. As in any war, if one side has a big advantage at the start, you have a limited period in which to exploit that to its full success, and then the Americans, the enemy, will learn what you're doing and take countermeasures. And this is, to put it crudely, this is what happens in the American War of Independence. Year by year, the Americans get better and better and better until by the end, they're probably on a par with British forces. Okay, one more interesting phenomenon that we see in America. Major General Phillips talking to the infantry of Burgoyne's army, the army that marched south to defeat Saratoga in 1777. Phillips is giving them instructions for their training before the opening of the expedition. It is well understood, Phillips says, that all regiments exercise by companies, but it is usually done with a view of joining in battalion. It is here meant, henceforth, that each company should be led to consider itself as a small, distinct body and to exercise in various evolutions independent of the battalion, with every possible view for single companies being taught to depend upon themselves. So unlike in Europe, where the companies of a battalion would work together in a single battalion line, they would perform, for example, musketry volleys in ordered sequences, platoon firing. Here, the expectation is that individual company commanders are going to have to take control of that company and operate semi-independently of the other units in the battalion and in the whole line. Down the bottom, he continues, it will be proper for the commanding officer of a battalion to put himself at the head of one company and to manoeuvre that company, while the other companies, being drawn up at small intervals of distance, follow the evolutions so given by the commanding officer. Again, these guys we saw at the beginning, that the formations, infantry formations, were loosened up, opened up, and the topography of the country, plus the widening, the opening up of those formations, would have prevented one man, the battalion commander, from being able to control all of those units over many hundreds of yards. So this is very sensible adaptation. And again, something that was prefigured in the French and Indian War, I'm sure. I've broken the rules here. I've done a quote here where the writing's relatively small. I do apologise, but it's such a good description of a British attack that I thought I must use it. This is Corporal Thomas Sullivan, 49th, Battle of White Plains, October 1776, part of Howe's New York campaign. In this instant, the 28th, 35th, 49th ordered to cross the River Bronx to support a Hessian attack at Chatterton's Hill. So I'll read it for you because it's so interesting. Lieutenant Colonel Carr, commanding the 35th Regiment, behaved with great courage, says Sullivan, being obliged to force the left of his battalion through the right wing of the 28th. They, being for some minutes attacked by the main part of the rebels' line and not in strength to advance. So they've stalled, basically. 28th has stalled. 35th then is pushed forward, and their wing clashes with the wing of the 28th. The 49th, says Sullivan, formed as well as the ground would admit, and every company had engaged as they came up. So as they found space to deploy to the right, they're able to get involved. The hill was so narrow, says Sullivan. The right-hand company of our battalion, 49th, had scarcely room to form until we beat the enemy some distance back. Before the 5th had been sent to support, those 3 units, had any ground to form and join us, we gave 3 cheers, huzzas, and 3 smart volleys, and we ran close up to the enemy, who were beginning to retreat as we were in close quarters. This material post being gained, the enemy routed, our brigade then formed on the hill, for during the engagement we were sometimes 12 deep, occasioned by the narrowness of the hill and the large rocks and trees that were dispersed upon it. So again, nothing like the caricature of the kind of fighting in the war that we get from Hollywood, for example. And nothing like what was being done, I'm sure, on the battlefields of Europe in the 7 Years' War. Another one, Danzig, Captain William Danzig, amazing guy, very likeable guy. His letters are so interesting. Skirmish, New Jersey, 1777. So not a full open field battle, but skirmishing against the local militia. Danzig writes, letter home, I faced 200 of the rebels with my company only. So, companies, you might have 40 odd guys with him. Only in a wood for 2 minutes, myself not 20 yards from some of them being the Americans, and received all their fire. Our friends thought we were cut to pieces, our friends being other companies operating some distance away in the same skirmish. Another company joined me. I drove the rebels and had only 1 man wounded in the arm. We killed and wounded 16 of them. I was so near as to call to them, by God, my lads, we have you now. So he's trying to hustle the Americans, make the Americans think that they're defeated, try and undermine their morale. In the hopes they'd be bullied into surrender, but that would not do. They answered me with a heavy fire. However, when I got my men to the trees round about me and the other company coming up to my support, I bullied them another way. Seeing them snug behind the trees, showing no disposition to run, too many of them to charge as we were too thin, I cried as loud as I could hollow that they might be sure to hear me. By God, soldiers, they run, have at them, my brave boys, which had the desired effect. One thought the other had run, and they all set off as if the devil drove them. We cleared the wood of them. They never showed themselves within shot again that day. Again, I love these accounts because they show the level of authority, the level of control that was devolved down to individual company officers. In this case, this is a light company in a skirmish. But you see the same sort of thing with battalion companies on various battlefields of the war. If you're interested in the issue of the flank companies that we mentioned, the elite units that were formed as the spearhead of the army, then you certainly should be going to read Don Hagist's book, These Distinguished Corps, my particular favourite extracts. John Wilkins of the 4th Regiment Light Company, 5th of October, in the act of trying to steal a light dragoon's horse, he tells the sentry, kiss my arse, I won't read it out, good Lord. Or John Brayson, the drummer of the 57th Regiment Light Company, during a flogging, March 1777. Captain Graham, he says, while he's being flogged, that rascal and gentleman, damn his honour, he has no more honour than a pig in a potato garden. So if you want the real British soldier rescued from obscurity, Don Germain. Don does enormously wonderful work in America, looking at what we would call the social history of the army in the war. He's written lots of books. That's my favourite currently. Lots of other books have been written recently by British historians. We've got 2 here, Robbie McNiven and Paul Knight. They've done lovely studies of individual regiments in the war. The Patton on the left, 33rd Regiment. On the right, 47th Regiment, very fine regiment. So again, anyone interested in the war and the conduct of British soldiers there, again, you could do very much worse than looking at these excellent books. There we go. Alex Burns, last guy, if you're interested in warfare in the period, Alex Burns, another American historian trying to change perceptions of how fighting was done. And I shall cease testing your patience and end there, gents and ladies. Thanks very much.